So the first part will just be covering the MPC decision, giving you background as to their decision and the elements there. But I'll try and deviate a little from the standard, the way I've been dealing with this, meaning just move away from that standard presentation and try and create a bit more, give you some more information. Sorry about that. So I will deviate a little from the standard presentation, but I think it will still be within, it will help you understand better the decision that was made by the MPC yesterday. So in terms of some of the numbers, inflation remains well under control. That is a story that that will remain with us, but it's important to maintain the point that it is under control, well anchored. It has declined to 5%, that's the CPI, 5% in the month of August, and shortly there'll be the new numbers for this month. Non-food, non-fuel has come down to 2.8%, and fuel inflation has come down to 4%. And if you recall, fuel inflation has really come down from something like 17.4% in September of last year. That was the peak after the implementation of a new VAT on fuel. You remember that whole discussion. That was at 17%, and I'm talking of the inflation, the fuel inflation, meaning the movement in prices, 12-month movement. In September last year, it was 17.4%, and that has come down now to 4%. And it's true we saw a spike in international oil prices 2 weeks ago, related to the bombing, or let's say, attack on the Saudi oil facility. Prices shot up and then came down. And we expect that will have limited pass-through, or will have limited pass-through, so it won't have a significant effect on inflation. We did calculate some rough numbers, but again, those are numbers based on some assumptions, speculation, and things like that. So inflation is well under control. The economy, how is it doing? The leading indicators, I'll talk a bit about them, but I think I should say that you will soon have the second quarter numbers, meaning all of us, because they'll be released at the end of this month, in a few days. And these are the second quarter GDP numbers, so the provisional ones. But we expect that they'll show an estimate of 5.8% growth in the Q2 of this year. And this is based on our own assessment of the leading indicators and so forth. Some indicators are quite strong. Things like importation of intermediate goods, which generally feed into manufacturing. They are in terms also about electricity consumption and generation. That also has shown strong performance. Cement consumption. Tourist arrivals, I think all of you know that we have been having unprecedented, well, we need to do those words again, right? In terms of the arrivals, the numbers are unprecedented, and you'd need to look at them, but I think the numbers are there for all of us to see. And also, as I'll mention later, bookings for forward booking in the hotels, in the various hotels, are quite strong, and I'll mention them in a few moments. So there are some strong positive indicators. Then you also have some that are a bit soft. And the one here that I think is worth mentioning is agriculture. With the delay of the long rains, you remember there was a delay in the long rains, and then also after that, it wasn't satisfactory, at least to farmers. That obviously has dampened our expectation dampened agriculture output. And so we expect a sort of a mixed outcome, but based on all this, mixing it all together, we have an estimate of around 5.8 in the second quarter of GDP of the year. Now, of course, the outlook going forward starts from those numbers, but I think we also have other things that we can tell you, which the MPC looked at, and this is the outcomes from the MPC market perception survey. I would note that a lot of you have found this very useful in terms of information, very much a treasure trove of information, and I think that is what we expected, that you'll be writing a lot from some of the numbers that are there, and we derive a lot of information. It's a good sort of feel, of you take the pulse of the economy from this survey. But I want to mention a couple of things from the survey. First is the high level of optimism with respect to growth prospects. So that has remained. This year we have seen very high sort of optimism numbers. So in September, the banks were at 87.5%, meaning they are optimistic. 87% of banks, let's say, of respondents were very optimistic or optimistic, so neutral in that, well, not neutral, optimistic or very optimistic in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the growth prospects. And non-banks also at 86% in terms of optimism, so optimistic or very optimistic, 86% of the respondents. These are good numbers for sure. Also on the given the backdrop of where we are, and let's say the noise that quite often is kicked up in our sort of discourse in our country. The positives, as indicated or as flagged by the respondents, were the Big Four agenda and implementation on that, the ongoing infrastructure projects that are there, the commitment of the government to clear pending bills, right? And also other things that were, let's say, the basis of the optimism is the intra-Africa integration. I think we know about the free trade area that kicked in on July 7th. The positive developments in the tourism sector, political stability, and the fight against corruption. All these were the others that I've left out, but those are the principal the reasons, let's say, of their positive outlook or optimism, sources of their optimism. Now, there are some risks as they flagged to us. The first of these is the interest rate caps, if those remain. The trade wars that are outside our borders. Obviously, we are talking about they were talking about the U.S. and China, and obviously their proxies. Delayed payments. So these are the pending bills. If there are further delayed payments, then this is a risk. Then another item, of course, was the low private sector credit growth, and there are others, but those were the numbers those are the, at least in general terms, the sources of optimism and also the risks, as pointed out by our interlocutors. I talked about forward bookings, and forward bookings, it will be in the material that will be presented, that will be given later in this show. Forward booking. for tourist hotel bookings. So September this year, meaning the September survey that we have, if you look at, let's say, what we have for December, we have 51.6% bookings, right? Compared to 42% last year at the same time, meaning comparing September to September this year and also September last year. So last year in September, if you looked at what was the bookings for October, only 42% were booked. Now we have 51. The month of November, we have 58%, and the month of December, we had 61%. So those are rather strong numbers. And compared to last year in September, when we had in October, as I said, 42%, November, we had 44%, and December, we had 47% bookings. So you can see there's a substantial increase, about 15 percentage points, which obviously is at this time, and we are talking December even. So we still have a few months to go, and the bookings are pretty solid. And I think a lot of you have seen in recent in the recent period that many of our hotels have even had 100%, fully booked, 100% occupancy, which is not something you see often in hotels. I think we all understand that. So that's something we wanted to put to you at this moment. I want to proceed with other things, if you don't mind. So the expectation, therefore, of the growth expectation for 2019 remains good. At this moment, we are projecting the same number of 6%. We will reevaluate it on the basis of the new, let's say, provisional Q2 numbers when we have them, which, as I said, will be released at the end of this month. And but we are still looking at something. Well, for the quarters, I said it is 5.8, but for the year as a whole, we are projecting 6%, and we will reevaluate that on the basis of the outcome of Q2, meaning the first half of 2019. Now, are there any risks to this growth? And the answer is yes, there are many. And I wanted to point out a few to you. And I think the first one, which we all have to appreciate, is that the external sector is worsening dramatically. And the MPC meeting, the MPC, the committee that is, discussed during the meeting, discussed the external sector quite in a fair amount of detail. And the things that are going on there, of course, relate to the, I mean, they're not things that we ourselves have control over. The trade wars is one of them. I think we understand that. The appreciation that there will be no winners in the trade war hasn't fully been absorbed by all the players around that war, all the fighters, all the warriors in that war. That is one that I think is quite clear. The other one, of course, is on top of that, there is uncertainty about the response, the policy response to the things that are happening in the global fora, in the global environment, global markets. So I think some of you have written about this, or you've seen stories about how let's say the central banks in the advanced economies will respond to the specific situation that is facing them now, including the softening of the global economy, meaning the projections now are being shaved down, and we expect some projections to be confirmed in about a week or so, the new projections that the IMF does, and ahead of their annual meetings. So this is something that I think most of us, or most of respondents or observers, do not have clarity as to how the central banks will respond. And I think we can discuss that later. For now, I think it's sufficient to say that. There are other issues as well. I mean, they are indicators more than anything else. You did hear the problems that were there in the U.S. dollar market, meaning a lack of liquidity or seizing up in the repo market, which cascaded into other markets. Now, I'm talking about that not because we are directly connected to them, meaning we are not in the same market, but the point is that that sent shockwaves across the financial sector, the financial markets of the world, and we therefore need to be more, let's say, careful, or in terms of, knowing that we are in a very, let's say, uncertain times. We are in uncertain times, and therefore we need to be cautious because we may be hit by another shock that is coming from, let's say, the advanced economies. So the environment is one that is less clear. There's another element that I think we need to put out there, and this also the MPC looked at, which is the consolidation, expected consolidation in the fiscal, in our fiscal budget, and the MPC was presented with information and discussed the plans, or let's say what has been going on over the last few weeks, and in particular, the National Treasury they had already presented a budget to Parliament, as you know, and they have redone, over the last few weeks, they've redone their budget from the ground up to make it more realistic, meaning they wanted to assure themselves that the budget is realistic. And they've done a sort of a ground up build as opposed to top down, and they've come up with numbers that now will obviously be presented to the appropriate authorities, including, I assume, the Parliament and including yourselves. But the point is that the numbers indicate a consolidation for this year. And the consolidation is expected, the target here is expected to be in financial year 1920, which is this one, a target of 5.9%, which really is an improvement from the outcome in FY 18-19 of 7.6% of GDP. So you can see there's a significant consolidation. And the issue there was, is it realistic? I mean, you can always do up a budget that looks nice, but is it realistic? And this really was the criteria, the most important requirement in the budget that they are now putting together. Now, what if they overperform? What will happen? It's true they can overperform, but if they overperform, the idea there is it will lead directly to a reduction in debt. So they will retire debt. Any overperformance in, for instance, revenues, or for that matter, overperformance in expenditures, whichever you want to think of it, the first beneficiary of that will be the reduction in debt. There is also the concern about pending bills, and this also has been addressed and will be addressed appropriately, which is, in the first instance, the bills or the carryover from last year will be the first charge, will be the first to benefit. So if there was any carryover from last year, the ministries will not be allowed to begin spending on other things. They first clear that, and so there'll be a much more, let's say, tighter, let's say, execution of the budget along those principles. Of course, this was what the MPC was was advised on, and they looked at more detailed numbers. But I guess what I would say is that you will have a chance to talk to the fiscal authorities in this regard. Where does that bring us? So the MPC was at a point where it could see there are clouds in the international markets and the global economy, which had weakened. And I think the numbers, as I said, that will be coming back to us will be much weaker than the numbers we saw, say, 2 months ago, the projections for global growth. That was one. But at the same time, they saw the potential for consolidation, meaning realistic consolidation, fiscal consolidation, and therefore saw that there could be scope. If this continues, there will be scope for monetary accommodation. So a sort of a loosening of monetary policy as fiscal policy tightens. So a rebalancing. We've talked about this in other occasions. We've talked about this rebalancing. And the example, as I said before, is fiscal was, if you are thinking of driving a car, fiscal had its foot flat out on the accelerator. And we, as monetary authorities, in order for the thing not to crash, we had our foot firmly on the brake. So the car obviously was struggling. And obviously you cannot continue like that for too long. So now if you have a rebalancing, then things will obviously be much more, will be safer and better outcomes. At the same time, of course, understanding that we do need buffers, because there may be a shock. There may be shocks, and we've been talking about this. Now, of course, we've mentioned this before, that we don't have just one buffer. There are buffers. So one of the buffers, of course, is having room to maneuver. So that's why you need to rebalance, so that you have room to maneuver on fiscal, and also you have room to maneuver on monetary if you are hit by a shock. We also have foreign exchange reserves, which we mentioned in the press release. And also, at the right time, when we get a precautionary IMF program, there will also be those resources available to us. For those of you that have asked the question before, where are we on this? The answer is we are still on that journey. We are in no rush. We will get there. We need to get there at our own pace, not dictated by somebody else. And I would strongly encourage you to follow Eliud Kipchoge, because the element here is you follow your own pace. Don't follow somebody else's pace. The runners in the room understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so those are the. I didn't say much about the external, the balance of payments, but a word on it may suffice, which is that the current account now has, let's say, the current account deficit has narrowed to 4.2%, and we expect the outcome to be somewhere, and this is from 5.5%. Last July, and we expect this we expect the outcome for 2019 to be 4.5% of GDP. And if you recall, we have always been saying that our norm should be somewhere around 5% of GDP. That's where we expect our current account deficit to be, based on our ability to finance it and other things. But the financing of the current account deficit is absolutely not a problem. And that's why we have had what I would call a balance in the FX market. And it's true there has been some, let's say, perturbations in the FX market. And this has been, the principal drivers for that has been significant demand. It's a timing issue. Significant demand of some, let's say, payments, private sector payments. Dividend is one concern, is one big one, and a few others. So, and that kind of shocked the system. Also remember that the U.S. dollar has actually strengthened significantly. And if you look at the table, I think it's probably in the package. You'll see that there was a significant strengthening in the last month, and now it's kind of weakened a bit. Your guess is as good as mine where this will go in the context of trade wars and things like that. But anyway, we could have that conversation in terms of where we expect the US dollar to be relative to other currencies going forward. I want to say two other things before, no, maybe I should therefore talk a little more about the decision itself before we move into other items. So the decision itself was, if you read, there's this element of the prospective tightening in fiscal policy that will provide scope for accommodative monetary policy in the near term. That is forward guidance to you and to your readers. That the expectation is if things go the way they are going and the fiscal policy, the consolidation actually takes place as planned or as announced, because it is realistic, we would expect it to be carried out realistically, then we could actually get into a sort of let's say, monetary loosening cycle. That's really the forward guidance that the MPC provided the market and provided to you. Now, there is the issue also about which direction would lead to an accommodation, as we've been talking about the perverse reaction or the perverse outcomes of, let's say, what used to be a loosening. I mean, in the past, a loosening was clear, right? You just lower the target rate. But you may not get there if there are significant perverse outcomes. So the question is, how is MPC going to deal with that? Because they asked you those perverse outcomes, but maybe when we get there, we'll have that conversation, and they'll tell you what. But they did think about all this, and the key to it is that, in addition to other things, the uptake of the other, let's say, innovative new credit channels, which are targeted to, let's say, SMEs and similar outcomes. But we'll get to that when at the next MPC meeting. Then a couple of other things. The banking sector, I think, has now, I'm not going to go into the details of how it is, because we've rehashed those numbers quite a bit. But in terms of capital adequacy, liquidity, and all that, there are no concerns that we are close to the red line or the yellow line or any of these things. But that doesn't mean that we'll leave the banking sector the way it is. Obviously, the higher liquidity means that the banks need to move towards lending in particular ways. So, but at the same time, credit risk remains elevated. NPLs obviously have remained, well, they were, in August, they were 12.7 last June, right? And now they are 12.6. Well, that's a marginal change, nothing to write home about. But the point here is that lending has not grown quite strongly. It's grown by, I guess it's 6.3, right? 6.3%, year on year. I mean, sorry, over the 12 months to July, to August. Yes, thank you, Rafael. But the point here is that banks have continued to resolve, or with resolutions of the NPLs, non-performing loans, with increased recoveries and obviously repayments. The sector remains stable. Obviously, we have been pushing for the, let's say, a revisioning of the sector on the basis of a new normal, which you've talked about quite a bit. You've also noted the significant consolidation that has taken place. It would be good if somebody wrote about the consolidation, which has been market-driven. If you remember 3 years ago, and you can go back to your notes, there were a lot of discussions between us about whether market-driven consolidation would work. And some of you kept coming back to the issue of Nigeria, that we should follow the Nigeria model. I hope you can now see that there is another way, and that there may have been, and this also has prospects of continuation, meaning we are not done yet. We are not done yet. I'm not going to go through the list of this, but I think we need to flag the ongoing reforms, the customer centricity. We'll come back to that in terms of, for instance, the banking sector charter that is there, and also other things that are there, strengthening of business models, risk-based pricing, which is very important. I think we've discussed this before, and strengthening credit information sharing, and transparency, full disclosure on pricing, etc. These are things that you could say you're beginning to see the green shoots, meaning the tree is not yet there, but you can see the green shoots. So the tree will become a tree. I think all of us know that you cannot plant a fully grown tree. That doesn't work. You'll damage it actually, but you have to make it grow naturally, meaning plant the seedling, take care of it, and so forth. So we are there. What else did I want to say? Okay, so maybe in finishing, we could talk a bit about demonetization. If some of you may or may not. Oh, thank you. Some of you may or may not. So what has been going on with the demonetization? I think this has been working well, at pace, and we are proceeding to the deadline of September 30th, 2019, which is just Monday next week. It is true, well, let's first begin. This, I'm not going to give too much information because I still don't have too much information. I'll give you some information. But what I'll do is to promise to have a press conference next week, right? And then we'll have just a press conference on that. And then we can be a little more free to discuss these things. So put that on your calendar. I think what has happened is we've had some old stories, right? The old stories are things like, oh, there are no notes. The new notes are missing. Oh, the ATMs are not working. The parking facilities are not accepting my new notes and things like those. Those were teething problems. And again, as I said at the beginning, we knew there was we didn't spread the notes. Let's say we didn't do volume. We actually distributed it all over the country for people to see, to taste, and be familiar with the notes and so forth. But after that, of course, we did distribute them at volume, and as you know now, that is not a concern whatsoever. So all those stories of ATMs and all that, those have been dealt with. And today now, there isn't a single bank that is actually giving you the old notes. I'm talking of just the 1,000s, by the way. Not the others are okay, not the 1,000. And I think this is something that most people have appreciated. We have also been on a very strong public awareness campaign, very strong. And it has been elaborate, it has been layered, and at times targeted. So you know we've been on TV, We've been, right from June 1, when the announcement was made, we've been on TV. We've been on media, on the print media, on your newspapers, quite heavy, particularly in the first 2 weeks. We've also then, we pivoted. This is a word that the comm people have taught me, you know, pivot. You pivot to things, you know. So we pivoted to what? To some other channels, social media, very heavy on social media at the beginning as well. And then eventually pivoted to the radio, right, to radio. That's not all, actually. We sent posters to every single primary school in the country. We used channels that follow the fast-moving consumer products. You can, you know, think of even your newspapers. We used your delivery people. I mean, they move stuff from A to B overnight. And we used all those channels, so there are posters everywhere. We also used the administration channels, chiefs, sub-chiefs, DCs, DOs, all that. And we are talking even the posters. All the other channels, the banks, commercial banks, their agents, the money agents as well, M-Pesa, money, those operators, M-Pesa, all the others. So in a sense, it was all points, all points. But I think I want to emphasize this thing that even as it is layered, it was also targeted. At the end of the day, we knew that the concerns we would have if we didn't do a good job would be not so much you and me. It would be people that are farther away, like people in the rural areas that don't quite get all the information and so forth. And this is where we went on a rather strong campaign, call it a road show, but you can call it anything else, and really targeted mashinani, you know, people out there. So we have been on radio, and as you know, radio is probably the most effective means of communicating there, and also redone the chiefs and sub-chiefs and so forth with barazas and things like that. So I think I've put in a lot of miles in terms of going from one place to the other, but I've also learned a lot about the country. So from my perspective, I think I'll do it again in a heartbeat, and I'll continue doing it for other reasons, meaning to understand, to really get a handle on how the country operates and things like that. So I just wanted to assure you in terms of the extensiveness of the public awareness campaign. We are still there the rest of this week, and through the weekend into Monday, we'll still be there in the various channels. By the way, I'm sure everybody in this room who has a phone and an account has also received a text message from the central bank. There are questions about how we got your number, but hey, we know you. You're using our money after all, you know, so we know you. Okay, so that's the general atmospherics, if you may, about that. But let me give you a few numbers, right? I'll give you some indications here. So you'll ask, how has this exchange worked? And, or rather, well, you know how it has worked in terms of who should have gone where. But in terms of numbers, 58%, 58% of currency exchange, let's say to September 1. Now let's talk the period to September 1. So just this month, leave out this month. Let's go to September 1. So those are 3 months, yeah? So June, July, August. 58% of currency exchange in value terms, was less than 500K, was less than 500,000. 75% of currency exchange in value terms was less than 1 million. And even if you want to go a little further, 91% of currency exchange in value terms was less than 2 million. So there goes that notion of, you know, there are people with serious money somewhere. There are not too many of them, frankly. At least we don't see them. So most of the exchanges, as you would expect, you and me will probably bring in our 10K or 20K, which you keep for, you know, various emergencies that may be there. What about in terms of numbers of transactions? Numbers of transactions. So that was only in value terms. In terms of numbers of transactions, 96% of the transactions, 96% were less than 500,000. The value of that were less than 500,000. And 99% were less than 1 million. So I just want to assure you that we are talking small transactions. So suppose you asked me, how many, so Governor, yes, but how many exchanges, meaning conversions, people coming in over the counter with money, cash, and wanting to exchange that? How much of that was above, let's say, 2 million during those 3 months? How many? You know, I'll tell you, only 24. Yes, you heard right, 24. Only 24 were above 2 million. You're getting shocked. And the average of that, let's talk the average, was 3.1 million. 3.1 million. I'll leave that there. I'm not going to elaborate or editorialize, but we can do that when I meet you again in about a week, okay? Now, what about what has been happening? Have we been having people rushing into banks and all those other things? What happened, Governor? Actually, the highest conversion was in June. June, the first month. 53% of the conversions of those 3 months was in the month of June. And actually it was in 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of June. Now, like the most recent numbers I've seen, it's even less than half of the pace that we had then. So people have converted. It's true there are people that are still converting today. Maybe in their mind, this is their optimal reaction. It's their decision. They can do whatever they want. They can even choose not to convert. That's their choice. But I think the point I'm making is, I think these are the facts. This is the data, and it may not match what some of us were thinking was going on. But I think it's good to see that the demonetization, at least by these numbers and the information I've given you, is proceeding at pace. There are other things I want to mention in finishing about the demonetization. Yes, remember the AML-CFT, that is anti-money laundering and requirements on combating financing of terrorism. Those requirements remain. So the banks don't just convert randomly when you come to the door. They actually, when you come to their counter, they have to go through those checks, KYC, and then once they're satisfied, they'll then make the conversion. So that remains. And yes, it has led to some discoveries, let's put it that way. We've also seen some counterfeits. You've seen them, and these also have been followed. So as I had said before, we are working hand in hand with some of the investigators who are responsible for these things, meaning investigating the counterfeits, investigating those sort of other requirements that are there. So, and that, of course, you'll continue to hear more about it about those sort of, what is happening to those people that have been, apprehended with counterfeit things, currency, and so forth. Then finally, other jurisdictions. We've received very good support from other jurisdictions. I think I mentioned last time we met, we've been in touch with our, let's say, our sister central banks. In particular, the East African Community, and importantly, Uganda and Tanzania, South Africa, DRC, and the list goes on. A little farther, you have Mauritius, you have India, and the list goes on. Because we know that we cannot work in isolation. This is something that needs to be dealt with from all angles. And they fully understand this, and they've been working with us and also working with their, let's say, investigative agencies. Once material information comes up in terms of that. I would say that we have already, the Ugandans and Tanzanians have already finished their conversions, and indeed repatriated their holdings of Kenya shillings. The 1,000, the old 1,000s. So all that has been done, waiting for the deadline. So the deadline will come to be just another day, and the day will end, and we will move on, having finished our demonetization campaign. So I'll stop there. I think I was given some numbers here, but maybe I should hold them to see if anybody pushes me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. As usual, we shall take questions in batches. Please say your name, your institution, and if you can please stand up, ask one question. So we just do one, and we'll come back and make that calculation.
My name is Fiscal. There have been posters in retail shops and supermarkets and some institutions stating that they're not accept the old currency past a certain date. We all have very different dates. From the 22nd, some of them running up to the 29th. Is this legal, and can we do this? Good morning. My name is Dr. Njoroge from TV. There is a place called Ramu, 75 kilometers from Mandela. And that place has not received the new currency. The members of the public are saying that they haven't seen it. So I don't know if you're aware about it.
Right, hold on. There's a third person right behind you.
Thank you, Governor. My question is in relation to
Where are you? Oh, there you are.
my name is Governor, my question is in relation to foreign currency conversion. I don't know if you have the numbers as well, especially with the US dollar and the euro. And also the roadmap for the old notes. There was, of course, an injunction from the EDB who was requesting for the 1,000 notes from the archives. I just want to get clarity from you on this. Thank you.
Right,
Jina langu ni Irene Gonda kutoka Biblia.
Okay.
Nilikuwa nauliza kuhusiana na wafanya biashara ambao wameanza kukataa kuchukua noti ya zamani ya shilingi 1,000 ikizingatiwa kwamba makataa hayajafika.
Then the last one.
My name is Franklin Sandy from the Standard. The Central Bank of Tanzania fined a couple of Kenyan banks for that anti-money regulations. I'd like to know if there be any regulated fraud in Kenya, or if you're satisfied with the regulations.
Okay. May I handle those? So there are two questions, Irene and I think it was Jesus, right? Both questions identical about the old currencies, where some people have indicated, according to you, that they will not accept currencies of a particular the old currency, the old 1,000 after a period of time. You know, I cannot tell you whether it's legal or not. That's not what we do. All I can tell you, it's legal tender to the date that we indicated, 30th. And it is important for all the actors, all concerned, to do what they can to make sure that those currencies get to the central bank before the end of close of business of that day. So that is the imperative that we are putting out there. So how they do that, whether they need time to go from A to B, that is really for them to work with their own banks, right? So really every trader and every one of us, of course, can go directly today and convert, you know. And I think my answer to you is ask those people to convert quickly. There's still 5 days to go. Let them, I mean, we have already had what? We had 122 days. And we have already had maybe 100 and, what's that?
116.
Already. So we've already had 116. So the point here is that let's concentrate on the actionable thing. And the actionable thing is convert your currency. Walk to a bank. Do what you can to make sure that this happens. But in terms of, say, a trader or any of these other people, they need to talk to their banks. They need to talk to their banks, because it cannot be that they don't have a system to make sure that those notes get to the bank, their commercial banks, and then get received in particular ways that we have agreed with the banks before the close of business of September 30th. When September 30th happens, close of business September 30th, you cannot go backwards. So it closes everything. No, it is fixed. I guess I would say it's fixed in concrete, but I don't know what that means now. But so I think it is important, it's imperative for us to focus on what needs to be done. And I request you to communicate this through, I mean, to your listeners or those that are writing, I mean, those that are reading your stories and things like that. What is most important now is to make sure that, you know, people have vacuumed their houses. Your grandma, your mom, your aunt, they vacuumed their, I hope that makes sense here, that they have actually done a good check in their houses to make sure that those currencies have been brought to the, I mean, have been converted. So that's all I can say about that. Now, you talked about a very specific place which is close to Mandera. I don't know the place. My geography is still a bit off. But we have been looking at how things have been going in Mandera. And the point there is, it's true, you don't have too many banks in the far-flung areas, I mean, the distant places out there, also to the north and also to the south. But suffices to say that all those people have heard the message. They've heard the message. I went to Ajir, you remember that? I've been to Garissa. Doesn't mean that I need to talk to every single person in Kenya. That would be a long time. And frankly, we don't know whether there are 45 million or 50 million or whatever, however many Kenyans we have. We'll find out in a few days, right? But the point again is to maintain, to make sure that they understand and they can make the trip. And it's our business to make sure that that happens. But I think the point here is, again, let's not stand idle, sort of, you know, lamenting the problem. You know, let's work with them. Let those that are close to them work with them. Meaning these are people with families. These are people who have chiefs and sub-chiefs and all that. How the solution for that place may be completely different from another place, right? So you cannot have a cookie-cutter approach to it, which is one solution for everybody. But I think that is what we are talking about, you know. So let's be sure that those people actually do get get support, whatever they need, in order to make the conversion. But again, as I say, some of the stories that have come up have been blown out of proportion. And I think we have to be honest. There was a story in Mandera recently. Sure, there was a lot of excitement when suddenly the traders in that place began to, let's say, refuse the 1,000 as Fraser has mentioned. And I think the solution was very simple. They actually just went to the bank, converted it, and now everybody's happy. They're using the new banknotes. So, and they have no problem. The deadline will come and go, and their business has not been interrupted. So I think the point here is let's focus on the solution, which is making sure that anybody who hasn't had the message because they were, that I think would be very, very, very difficult. That there's a person, by the way, even those people in those far-flung areas, they have cell phones. And guess what? They all got messages. So I think the point here is not that they don't have messages. Rather, they did not get the message. I think they have all got the message, and if there is one or two of them that still needs support to convert, well, let it be. By the way, when I was in Garissa, I did talk, and there are photos of this as proof of me talking to traders. I found Garissa fascinating. This market, the largest market in Eastern Africa of livestock. And they even told me that they have camels that come from Somalia. And I wondered how that happens. But, somehow they cross the border, but they come from all over. And we were talking to the traders there, and they knew. It's true, they do cash. Their job is cash. And we asked one trader, and we asked others as well. They knew about the deadline, and they knew what they needed to do. So there's no concern whatsoever among those traders. We've been also with traders in other places as well. There's one that I need to throw at you. Currently, we have a problem in Njoroge, where you have, Njoroge now they're reaping they're harvesting the wheat. And so we've seen an influx of purchasers who are purchasing wheat, cash. And let's just say those transactions are quite concerned to us. So I don't want to say more, but I think it is important for you to know that we are following things around the country. And at this moment, Njoroge is a concern. Those are the questions that were there. There are two other questions. Foreign currency conversion. The foreign currency conversion followed any other transaction, right? So it's just like you can go into your bank and you want to buy US dollars, you want to make a purchase or something, you want to pay for school fees of your kids, whatever it is. So there's no difference there. You need to satisfy the KYC, just like everything else. They need to know you. So the point is, we did not restrict foreign currency in a sort of odd way because of the demonetization. What we have done is to insist on the KYC, meaning those considerations are there. And if you go to a Forex bureau, that's exactly the same thing. So it doesn't matter whether you are getting your foreign currency from a commercial bank or, for that matter, an FX bureau, a foreign exchange bureau. The same requirements apply. And so you could say that quote-unquote loophole has been dealt with. Does that mean that every single person we are sure that nobody ever misused that possibility? Obviously not. But I think we have really been, and the banks have been on top of that. In some cases, when we have flagged a concern in an institution, we've gone in and done a targeted inspection on what they are doing. So yes, we've been very much behind the scenes, really following the entire system to make sure that nothing begins to, I mean, we don't have the concerns that you're raising, meaning that there's a loophole that somebody begins to exploit. The roadmap for old notes, I didn't understand, well, maybe I'll answer it. I didn't quite understand the first part. But because once the old notes are with us, we will destroy them. You know, we just destroy them and that's it. And in a sense, you could say we'll cross them out from our register and that's it. They'll just be paper and then we destroy them, that's okay. Now, maybe you are talking of the old, not the 1000s, but the other ones, meaning the 5000, the other denominations. And those are actually the roadmap for that is like as before, which is we will withdraw them when they get dirty. So they come, it's a sort of a standard process. When the notes come to commercial banks and they are dirty, they come to us and we give them the new ones. We exchange them. So there's a circulation of it. I would strongly encourage you to go to the museum up here, the museum, the Njoroge, well, I guess it's called the National Museum. There's a section that is a currency museum, and it explains these things very well. So if you could do that. But there's a question, the second part of your question, you mentioned the DPP and archived and all those other things. Let me give you some clarity as to what that is about. I don't know whether what you said is accurate, but let me explain how that is operating. You see, not every one of us, I mean, there is currency that is being held in the courts. Think of maybe somebody was robbed and there's 1 million shillings or 500 shillings or even 10,000 shillings or even 1,000 shillings that is held as an exhibit, you know, for the court process. You know, if they don't bring that to us, that money will be worthless. And so the dispute, whatever the dispute is, will be vacuous because the money in the end on October 1 will be worthless. Also, you have things, for instance, you could think about the prisoners. Prisoners, once you go into prison, once you're brought into prison, your pockets are emptied, and if you have money to be held for you until you get out. I'm told that that's standard practice. So if you had a 1,000 shilling note, when you are released from prison, when your time is done, that if you haven't converted it, that 1,000 will be worthless. And you're in prison, you don't have control of your conversion, you understand? So we have worked with the authorities, meaning the prison authorities, so that we can actually convert those currencies. So when you leave prison, or when that person, the prisoner, leaves prison, there will be a new 1,000, even though he gave an old 1,000. I think he'll be happy for that, as opposed to showing up and it's only an old 1,000 which is valueless. You understand? So we've been quite diligent in trying to figure out where the extremes, if you understand what I mean. We could just have sat here and said, you do it, whatever happens. But we've worked with the judicial system. We've worked with the, obviously I guess the prisons services. We've worked with DPP. We've worked with the DCI. All the people that have all this, that may have these monies. We've also worked with the EACC. All those entities, because they do have some money and we do not want to lose it, and they're holding it for particular purposes. I hope that settles that. Then there was a question about Bank of Tanzania. Again, this is something which requires explanation. I hope you've seen the penalties were on Tanzanian banks. I hope you understand that. If you look at the names of the banks, they are all Tanzanian banks. Okay? You have African Banking Corporation T Limited, Equity Bank Tanzania Limited, I&M Bank T Limited, I assume T means Tanzania, UBL Bank T Limited, and Habib African Bank Limited. The point is that, remember, those are separate entities licensed by their subsidiaries, maybe of other institutions that may be from here or somewhere else in the world, or maybe they are standalone institutions, but they are licensed and supervised by the Bank of Tanzania, according to the in that jurisdiction, according to Tanzanian laws. That is important. They are not Kenyan banks. Just like we have banks here that are from other parts of the world, you know, but they are here. We are the ones that have given them. When they came, they are subsidiaries of other institutions, right? From other, but they are our banks, and for the most part, they have a K in there somewhere. I assume K means Kenya, you know, and so the point here is there are institutions that are there, and it is important to see that our brothers and sisters in the neighboring jurisdictions are actually doing what we are doing. This is what I mentioned earlier, talking about cooperation. You know, we did this with our banks, meaning we did look at how our banks were doing anti-money laundering and things like that, and we dealt with it, and you can see the Tanzanians are also doing the same. I think this is really praiseworthy and commendable. You know? But in terms of the substance, these are things that happened in 2013, you know, and after that. So those are things that have been there. But I think we are fully aware, and I think we should say that this is commendable. It will help make sure that there's no place to hide for any bank that, or rather, the law has to be followed. The laws that are in place have to be followed. Hope I've answered your question.
My name is Paul Wafula from the Daily Nation. When you talk about close of business, is it 4 p.m. accounts closed? Is it midnight or what time? Because a supermarket that operates up to 8, or some businesses that only accept you pay after the service, assuming I run a hotel, someone has already eaten, and it's on the day of the legal tender. If you refuse that money, what happens to you? That's the question. On that day, what really is the time for supermarket to really cut it off? The second thing is that there are numbers that you really need to give us in terms of what you just left out. How much really has been exchanged so far? Because you have given out at least the new currency, we need to see the numbers, not just the percentages that you've given us that are good, but not really very good for our stories. The third thing, the business media is concerned, and these are housekeeping. We feel that the central bank is shutting us out. It wants to tell us what it wants to tell us, when it wants to tell us, but when we want to get some information from central bank, given just the example you gave of monetary policy and fiscal, where somebody is on the pedal, the other one is on the brakes, we feel the same way, that at some point you only want it to be one way, to tell us what you want, when you want, and when our reporters really ask questions, even the professional courtesy of just saying we receive your email and we will not respond to it does not come through. I don't think that's a good relationship that we have. That is something I needed to come and raise it so that at least you appreciate that, yes, our work also has to continue. Thank you.
Let me answer that question. Do I need a microphone, or am I okay? I'm okay. You know, Paul, we've been in this journey for quite some time, 4 years now. It is very hard for me to go back and forth and sort of say who did what, right? Meaning who has done what and who owes who what. It's not for this business. We are in front of the entire nation when we are talking about these things. So, sure, we need to improve the way we interact with you. There's no doubt about it. And the central bank, by the way, in more general terms, central banks have generally been accused of not being very communicative. That is true. But we, I think, have been quite out there. However, we also march to our own drama. And I would hate to say that I'm marching to Paul Wafula, right? I'm marching to my own drama. And if you see we are there, we are independent. If you see it is in our constitution. So I don't think we will sort of get into a discussion as to what the central bank should or should not do. We have our business to do. You do yours, we do ours. Let's work together. So you just gave me a list of demands. You really want to give us, I don't know what. We need to see the numbers, I don't know what. I think let's be a bit humble. Let's appreciate that there are numbers that we can give you, the others won't give you. So let's appreciate and let's understand where each other stands. I don't want to get too much into this, but I sense that I'm getting a list of demands, of grievances. There are ways of dealing with the grievances. And you can always talk to Alice. He's there for you. He has your number. You have his number. So let's not ruin the conversation because of certain, let's say, grievances that you may have. I think that is for a different forum. Let's move on.
You told members of the Digital Vendors Association of Kenya that some of their platforms are being used for and could you please elaborate on that and give us a spike of sort of what you do about it? Then about how you know that the government has not committed to technology, what is the way from technology if you really pushing for it and then we'll see that stuff.
But there's a whole bunch of that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Governor.
Good afternoon.
Probably like to know what's the worst that can happen to an individual in case you're found still hiding this old code. Do you attract a penalty or innocence? Thank you.
My name is Kefa Njoroge. I'm a citizen, and I just sum up my concerns or my questions on the administration, just two of them, and hopefully the numbers you put aside will come into use now. You've given us some numbers in terms of where the valuation are raised in terms of the collection so far. In a recent interview, you put the number of collected money out of the 217 million units at around 100 million. I'm curious of where we stand today. And in terms, if you could offer some context into the numbers we are looking at in terms of the bigger picture of things, what we wanted to achieve as a central bank. What is 99% of transactions under 1 billion? What does that mean at this time? This is some interpretation of the numbers.
Okay, fine.
And the last one.
You said 1-1.
Yeah, I'm just summing up. There were media reports pointing to the flagging of about 800 accounts.
8 what?
There was some media reporting, not necessarily of the flagging of 800 bank accounts in terms of the administration process. Would you like that explanation?
All right, there's someone in front of you here. Then we take that as the last one and we'll still come back.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Victoria from Metropolitan TV. Two questions. On the issue of NARO, I'm interested to know up to a high of how much have you seen the purchases? And because you said it's a concern to you, then we understand that Kenyans are usually so much of last minute. Any possibilities of an extension?
Can I answer that?
No, I'll answer that. Okay, fine. Let's take it from the top. You are asking about the digital lenders online, digital lenders. I think the point here is that, well, I can say this without, let's say, breaking any confidence. We did have a very good, you seem to have known that they spoke to me, and we did have a very good conversation, and they understood what our concerns were. I think I was quite clear that the concerns were, there were several concerns. They are working in the country without being licensed in particular ways. I don't know if, if you change your profession and you wanted to do some kiosk, that you can open a kiosk out here in the intersection without a license. You'll have a very hard time from Kaju, and other places, right? So we understand that. So why would we not expect the same in this particular area? There were concerns about the way they dealt with customers, customer centricity not being there, meaning they were dealing with customers rather harshly. And I think there are many stories that maybe some of you have already even written about. There are concerns also about how they were the source of their money. If you are, for instance, a shareholder in a bank or any of these institutions, when you bring your money, we actually check what's the source of money. So you don't just show up with a cash in a particular. We need to have sight of it and also to know where the money is. And I hope you appreciate that the financial sector is the most risky. This is why it's so highly regulated. I think it's not, even the medical profession is not as regulated, is not as highly regulated as the financial sector because of the risks that are there. But we can argue whether that's the case or not. So those are some of the concerns that obviously we raised, and they understood it. And I think the point is it was a very good conversation. Where we go from here, we'll see. But I think the point is, like everything else, the most important thing is to first have some understandings on what the concerns are, rather than just decide on what the outcome is. So I think that's all I can say about that. You talked about STAWI. STAWI needs to be sort of, I would say, energized. There were some technical problems that were there. STAWI was not built on a basis of government guarantee. STAWI is purely and simply a product of the commercial banks. Purely and simply a product of the commercial banks. In the same way, when you go to borrow, do you get a guarantee? Do you somehow find a way to get somebody to guarantee you? Well, if you can do that, you'll be very lucky, right? But most of us cannot. And we have to go under our own steam. And that's the way STAWI is. So STAWI is not a government product. I hope this is very clear. It isn't. It is actually a purely commercial product like any other. And the innovation in STAWI was to use information that is readily available in order to actually lower the risk premium of a loan to the SME sector. That was the innovation. That was the innovation. And that's what we'll need to capitalize on. So if we can do it, if they can do it well, I think we have a solution that will be transformational. Now, it's true, if there is also a layer of guarantee, that is okay. But that is a different problem. It's not the problem that we are looking at. But it is important that all borrowers appreciate that this is commercial borrowing. This isn't any of the other manenos that we get, Maria Selikari. And it's true the government will have its own channels on other products, but let's not confuse these products. In the same way, for instance, you have, anyway, I think I've explained enough. So I hope that is clear will be clear to your readers, because STAWI is a transformational product, and I have spoken about it in various places. And I've told you this already, and the other jurisdictions, they are really amazed about that innovative nature of the solution. In a sense, when you resolve something, everybody says, it was so easy. But there's a burden of leadership, and that's what we are trying to sort of overcome, if you put it that way. But it is a private sector product, which means it actually has value in terms of the lender, and it also has value from the borrower's perspective. And I have already told you what was so innovative in this product. Okay. Then we had, I don't know if it is, somebody asked about the penalties of old notes. There will not be any penalties for old notes. The penalty is just losing your value. So after September 30th, if you're holding the old 1,000 note, it's upon you. You have lost your value. That's it. If indeed you end up, now what happens with other issues, I don't know. But in terms of holding these notes, there will be no penalty in holding it. I hope I'm very clear about that. So the penalty is just losing your value 100%, 1-for-1. Now, Kefa asked about what are the numbers. Actually, my problem with the numbers, even though it's true I did mention that number, the numbers are moving very quickly, right? So, and it is important to wait until the end. And I think I mentioned that also in that interview, that even though I can quote numbers, and I think even Paul will appreciate this, I could quote some other numbers today. But I also have to be sensitive to what will happen in the end, right? It's like everything else, it's the end product that matters, not what you've done halfway. You could have run the marathon very well. The first 26 miles, or from our perspective here, 40 kilometers. But if you don't finish the last 2 kilometers, you are still a DNF, did not finish. So I think the point I'm making is, actually most Kenyans are truly Kenyan, if you understand what I'm saying, in the sense of where their aspirations are, what they want to do. The fact that there are some Kenyans that have like 1 million shillings in the house, they are exceptions. Now, the other numbers that some of you have thrown at me, hundreds of millions. Here, sijui. So let it sit. I hope I've answered your question, Kefa. But I guess the most important thing here was to mention that the numbers are small, the values are small, and also the pace has come down, meaning there was a sense, and this goes to the issue, I don't know who said that Kenyans, yeah, it's Vicky who was saying that Kenyans like to wait until the last minute. I don't know about that. The Kenyans I know came in June, as these numbers show. So a lot of us actually did our conversions earlier. Now you have the sort of laggards. And where the laggards were, I don't know. So I think it is important to see that. And as I said, the Tanzanians have already done their thing. And they had a much bigger battle they had a much bigger hurdle. The Ugandans have also done their thing. So it's only us Kenyans. So, and we've been given 122 days, and 116 of them have gone by. And the last 5 days is when, however many days are left, is when we are saying, no, I see the deadline now. So my only point is, you asked the question, and I need to respond to it. You asked the question whether there will be any extension of the deadline. The answer is no. N-O, no. N-O. There was a question over there about the elaborate thing about going to a restaurant and things like that. I can ask you, you do what you need to do on that day, right? But again, as I say, the merchant should be in touch with the bank. I cannot tell you what they need to do. I cannot have a judgment of Solomon or any of these things. I think you need to appreciate that that is a decision that the merchant, the one who is running that kiosk or running that restaurant or that supermarket. I mean, whether they choose to open or not is not. They don't come to the central bank to ask, to get approval to open on a Sunday or any of these things. It's their business. So they run their business according to the laws of the land, and that's all I can say about that. But again, to emphasize, they have been in touch with their own bankers, and they understand exactly what it is. You're asking whether it is midnight and all that. We have close of business. Well, everybody understands close of business. So when the central bank shuts down its computers, close of business, that is it. So when I sign off on the balance sheet on that day, before I go home, that's it. So I hope I'm very clear about this. But frankly, I find this fascination with the deadline rather, how would I put it, unhealthy. It's very unhealthy. Focus on what needs to be done, and let those that have that responsibility deal with it. The merchants, they know what they're doing. Let them deal with it. They know what is at risk. Let them deal with it. I think I've exhausted the question. Oh, there was a number, 800 bank accounts, I don't know. You know, this is the problem of coming to these things. You do more research than I do. So I don't know what that is all about. So I can just ask you to ask the person who wrote that article. If he or she happens to be here, he can explain where he got those numbers from. But to be truly honest, I get worried, and this is bonus points. How is that? I get worried about how we write things, notwithstanding Paul Wafula. There was an article recently in the Standard, right, by Franklin Sunday. I found his name interesting, Sunday. I don't know whether there's that person. And he was talking about the closure of businesses. And he said between January and March and, I think it was March and August, 388 companies had been deregistered. And this was a major issue, according to the article, because it shows the weakness in the economy. People are losing jobs. There's a whole list of people that have been laid off from banks. So this was a story that when I read it as a reader, it's true. I do read the Standard. You should be happy. I do read the Standard. There was a sense that I do read the others, by the way, all the others. So, yeah, I'm not selective. Okay. There is only one little problem. And the problem is simply that actually this is something that happens all the time. Meaning the registrar dissolves or deregisters companies, according to various criteria every single year. So the question was, is this more or less than last year? Right? This was March to August, 388 were dissolved. The question is, what happened a year ago? What happened? Is the pace increasing or decreasing, or what is going on? And if the registrar said, no, this is okay, meaning we do have this sort of churn, if you want. And why do they deregister them? For all sorts of things. They weed them because they weed them out because they're dormant, court processes, all the other things, or the people themselves. But on the other hand, a critical number that they never told us in that article was, oh, by the way, are there any new companies that are being born as you remove some? There's not a mention of that, because the issue is the stock, right? Not just the flow of one way. And you can probably tell him or her that there are about 700 to 1,000 companies that are registered each week. So I hope you can see where that is. So these are my concerns, in a sense, that at times we don't work well with numbers, but we can have that conversation offline.
Duncan from Reuters. Governor, 3 quick questions. First of all, there was a newspaper report the other day about a fifth of all bank loans that are lent out digitally being bad. About what? All digital loans. Yeah. All digital loans, issued by banks, 21% were bad, according to the KBA. The newspaper was quoting the KBA. Any comment around that? The second one, there was a bill that had quite angered the central bank, something to do with the Financial Markets Conduct Authority. I'm just wondering where we are with that. That was going to form a parallel body to do sort of the same work that you're doing. It came from the Treasury. I don't know what's the latest on that. And very finally, any word on the IMF standby facility that Kenya wanted? Thanks.
I think Jimmy, and since Brad is behind you, and then we'll come to the side.
Jimmy, you've been very patient today. What went wrong?
It's because I had a number of questions, actually.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Governor. So the first question is with regards to what Kefa had asked in terms of flagged transaction, how many are they so far, or what reports are you getting from banks? And also on the same question, what is with the new approach? Because we understand that currently what the CBK is doing is whenever there's a flagged transaction, what you're doing is going after the information of the account holder and looking at their tax compliance. Maybe you can address that. And the other question is about the economy. Do you believe the economy is in recession so far? Because we've seen the number of jobs that are being expectation that companies are going to reduce their numbers. The other question is... No, those are two questions. The third one actually is with regards to the increasing number of bank heists and these heists that are currently going on. Where does the CBK stand? The other one is... okay, just one more. Yes, one more. Is the CBK going to be doing this exchange for Kenyans who probably will wait until 30th to come and walk in?
Brian?
Yeah, my question is a brief one.
Please hold it very close.
It's a brief question. Are you seized of the liquidity challenges at Spire Bank, and what are you doing to protect the savings of teachers?
And then on this side, was it start here? Someone was not answering. Yourself, Alex?
Okay. My name is Eric Ombok from Bloomberg. Last week at the Eric Ombok from Bloomberg.
Imperial Bank?
No, Bloomberg.
Oh, Bloomberg.
Yes.
I get very worried when a banker asks. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Last week at the Rent Cap conference, you did make reference to the rate caps being a temporary measure, and you also did make reference to the rebranding of Barclays. Now, in view of the action that the National Assembly has taken with regard to rate caps, what's the way out of that? And secondly, is there anything that is holding back the approval for change of ownership at Barclays?
Alex?
My name is Alex Mwangi from NTV. On the issue of the discussion the meeting that you had yesterday, the MPC meeting, you said that there were a number of external factors that were discussed that are impacting the economy. I wanted to know whether Brexit is one that featured, and whether there are any specific measures that are being put in place to mitigate any effects that might happen, especially because we are close to the deadline in case there is no extension. Thank you.
Are there any urgent questions? Is it great?
It's a question. Just a last question. I'll pass your concerns, although you should have noticed that I moved back to Business Daily. I'll pass your concerns to Standard.
You moved what?
To Business Daily newspaper.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. You never wrote to me.
I will pass your concerns to Standard. So, my question is about the NPLs. You say that they are around 12.6 from 12.7, but then the credit to the private sector increased by 6%. So it must mean that the NPLs are actually higher. So do you think there's a concern in terms of the NPL situation in the country, and are you open to discussions around probably having banks have more lax ways to handle this issue rather than the strict?
Yeah.
Okay. I suppose that
thank you.
Anyone else that has anything now?
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's deal with this whole set of them. Digital loans, NPLs, somebody asked that. I don't have the numbers with me right here on this, but I think the numbers that we have seen, it's true the non-performing loans of digital platforms move very quickly. That is something that is not appreciated as much. For instance, around January, they actually increased quite a bit. Remember, they are short-term and things like that. So they move, the volatility on that is quite high. But I cannot give you a number today and now. Also remember that there are two sets of digital loans that we are talking about, digital loans that are in the regulated sphere. You understand. And then you have all these other loans that are in the unregulated sphere that we just now talked about. So I think the experiences are really different in that. So I'm sorry, I don't have any more.
That article was referring to the regulated sphere, commercial banks.
Yeah. Okay, but I'm just saying I don't have the number here. I wish I did, but I wasn't ready for that. So, but I wanted you to distinguish it because it's night and day, and I think you probably have seen it yourself, right? And even the issue of customer relations, it's night and day in terms of those two spheres. Doesn't mean that things are perfect in the regulated sphere. No, it doesn't mean that. I'm just saying that it's better not to look at the average, but to look at them separately. Okay, if you'd indulge me, I'll move on this. The financial market conduct, whatever it was, that I think we were very clear that we really, it needs a revamp, not just having a version 2.0, but rather a complete revamp as to how we need to deal with that sector. And I think that is now, I don't want to say it is in storage, but rather at the time will come when this will be, that question will be brought again on the table. But it won't be bringing back that bill and trying to panel beat it, to be a sort of a complete relook as to, because we raised serious concerns, and I think it was clear. You do remember my Subaru analogy. IMF, you asked. As I said before, we will continue with discussions with the IMF. There's absolutely no problem with that. The only thing I mentioned is that we need to do it at our own pace. And I think there are concerns maybe, I guess it was 3 months ago when we said that, and some of you are very concerned, feeling that we needed to have an IMF program to go ahead to borrow the Eurobond and things like that, which we told you, no, it's not. And I think the facts are clear that we never needed that in that sense. But we need it for the reason that I mentioned, which is as a sort of a final line of an insurance, basically, policy, so a final buffer, so that in a case of serious risks or serious, if the risks that are there are large and they materialize, then we can always disburse. It will be a precautionary arrangement, and in terms of the content of it, it will generally be along the lines that we ourselves are comfortable with, the policies that we are pursuing in the jurisdiction. So I think you should be more comfortable with that, as we have explained. There's a question about flagging the bad transactions and things. I don't know. Again, here is where we have, I would say that there are misconceptions. Sure, when there is a transaction that is, let's say, flagged, sure, we are looking at it and trying to understand whether this transaction can go ahead or not, and what is the basis of it. So the person who is responsible for it will need to come forward and provide all the information. And frankly, if the information is available, what's the problem? I mean, it's when information is not available, and it should be available. Typical thing, think of yourself when you're stopped on the road driving and they ask for your driver's license. I mean, if really you have forgotten your driver's license, it can be resolved easily. But if indeed you are cagey about whether or not you have a driver's license, even though you are not 18, that would be a problem, because it reveals that there are many more things that are unwell. But the idea that all these are being referred to KRA, that is not correct. KRA is one of the agencies, but there are many other agencies, or there are a few other agencies that the matters such as this can be referred to. I think we can all understand if, think about the transactions that maybe were problematic from a point of view of CFT, combating financing of terrorism. And there are those, if they are flagged, what do? Do you just talk to KRA? Of course not, So I think the point here is to use the entire panoply of available investigators and so forth, right? The economy is in recession. Well, that's strange. I don't know who asked that question, but I would like to have a conversation with him or her. Is it you, Jimmy? Yes. Oh, yeah. As I said, it grew at, last year, it grew at 5.9. 5.9? Last year? Oh, which year grew by 5.7? Anyway, I have all the numbers here. The trouble is it's only me who is on TV, you know, so I need to actually quote the right things, right? Okay. Okay, so 12 months. If you go as far back as 2015, Jimmy, the growth rate was 5.7. In 2016, the growth rate was 5.9. In 2017, remember that year, the growth rate was 4.9. In 2018, the growth rate was 6.3. Are we in recession, Jimmy? And the first quarter was 5.6. If we are to get, and we are expecting in this quarter 5.8 in the second quarter, all those are positive. So I don't think, but to be clear, the question perhaps you may have wanted to ask is not the word recession, but rather is the economy softening? That's probably, meaning is the growth rate decelerating? That's probably what you had in mind. And the answer here is that we still think the year will come at 6, but we will revisit the annual growth rate after we have the Q2 data. And there are certain factors that we haven't brought into the picture, right? At this moment, we are seized by the negative factors, meaning the external factors and so forth. So we are more concerned about the downward risks as opposed to the upward potential. Remember, quite some time ago, we talked about what may appear to be a perfect storm. I did mention this maybe at the beginning of this year. And for instance, if the fiscal consolidation turns out to be stronger, and also, let's say, the agendas that we talked about, the big four and all those, have more efficacy, and the private sector takes off in particular ways, I think we'll be talking much higher rates. So I think there is some positive upside potential. But I think at this moment, we still do see the economy is vibrant, and I gave you some details in terms of the respondents to our survey, and why is it that they thought that there are some positive factors that may push up the economy. Bank hastes. I think I would say a couple of things. One is, unfortunately, criminals at times deal with these things, right? I mean, criminals are criminals, and we have to always think about solving things so that the criminals don't get to us. It doesn't mean that there's a sort of an explosion of haste. I think what happened is some rather colorful ones. All right, there's the one on a Sunday morning, and there's the other one in Wajir or someplace like that. I don't remember where it was. The point is, all these cash in transit issues, we need to tighten them. And we need to make sure that those CIT, cash in transit providers, have improved their systems and made sure that those systems are not compromised. So that's what I would say, and we are working on that as well. It is important to assure us that there is safe transit, safe custody and safe transit of all valuables, including cash. So I think that's what I would say on that one, yeah. There was a question about the 30th that I only wrote the 30th here. There's no, I don't know in how many ways I can say this. 30th comes, 30th happens, and we move on. So there is no flexibility around the 30th. Let that be clear to your readers, to your listeners, and so forth. So that's what I had written here. So I hope it's clear to all of you. You are coming back to it in various ways, but it's the same question. Is it the 30th? Surely, you know. How different is? And I think from your perspective, you should appreciate that it is the 30th. Surely, it's not almost surely. It is the 30th. Surely. Okay. Liquidity challenges in various banks. It's true. We are always there to work with any bank that is facing whatever challenges, not just liquidity challenges. That's also why we are the land of last resort, by definition. But I think the point in all this is we have to take a broad view because of not just a particular institution, but the entire financial sector, to protect the financial sector as well. So that's all I would want to say about liquidity. But frankly, at this moment, there is a lot of liquidity in the system. I mentioned the number 50.8%. So there's a lot of liquidity in the system. From time to time, the liquidity level plummets dramatically. For instance, we did have that moment about, I guess it was a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I think it's a week ago when various payments came due. And you had, for instance, VAT came due. I think it is on the 20th of the month. So some taxes came due. There are other payments that were being made. So in a sense, that drew out liquidity from the system. And then also you have another time when, for instance, the salaries come through, when the government pays its salaries, or for that matter, when it paid the pending bills. And then the system is flush in liquidity. So it's our job to manage liquidity in the system. Rate caps, I don't know what to tell you because I've been very clear about where we stand on rate caps. So I can only tell you that, yes, we still continue to be insistent that the rate caps are damaging to the economy. So you tell me how you're going to fix the economy. So our view is not rate caps. I think, again, here is another one where we are so focused on the issue of the words, the two words, rate caps. The question is, let's see what's happening in the economy. And as you know, we've traveled. I mean, even before. We went into the, I don't know, this would be a good story for your readers. I mean, go and talk to some of the people in Gikomba that we talked to. Go and talk to the mechanics in Nokopalin. Go talk to the traders in Gikomba, you know, that are selling the clothing and all that. Go talk to the metal workers. I forget the other place. What's the other place? My friend. What is my friend's name? What's my friend's name? The guy. What is his name? Yeah, but what that area? What is it called? Anyway, he's being cagey. Ziwani, exactly. Go talk to the people that are building, that are making those furniture on Gong Road. Go talk to the traders in Kondere. We've been there. Go talk. I mean, let's get out of this sort of notion of being in Nairobi to understand that we understand what's going on in the economy. Ask them. Really ask them what's going on. So here we are, and you know, for you and me, we say, you know, January, you know, and we emphasize that there are problems in January and other, you know, hakuna pesa. But you talk to them, and they'll tell you how things really are from their perspective. And it is no longer an academic exercise, or no longer just an exercise of, no, this is something that is significant. And if we decide that we don't care about that whole sector of population, then that's another story. That's a completely different story. It has impact on lives of people. It impacts people, human beings. So I think it is much more important in that sense. And it's not the rate caps that is at issue. So the issue is, how will we deal with that set of population? They are our people. By the way, they don't have all the millions that some of us seem to claim we have. So I leave that. But now let's talk Barclays. I don't know what to add to say about Barclays. I don't know who was asking. You asked me as well, yes. They are, Barclays, obviously the history is clear, you know it. They want to adjust their position in Africa, and this has been going on for several years. They've been working with the regulators in, I believe, South Africa and 13 other jurisdictions. I think it's 13 other jurisdictions in Africa. And so, yes, they have to deal with each regulator and understand what each regulator wants. But as we do as regulators, we work together. So we do meet and explain to them as a group, make our life easier and their life easier, and we discuss what is needed and what they need to do in order to satisfy the completion of what they want. So that's all I want to say about the transformation that Barclays is going through. Brexit, I guess it's anybody's guess as to what will happen on October 31. And maybe that's why you keep asking me whether there'll be an extension on September 30th. If that's the case, then I think I would tell you that we are on different channels, you know. You switch channel and get off Brexit and get on Kenya, you know. Yeah, so, but I think I mentioned before that we were assured that no matter what happens, the Brexit agenda, we will have our trading regime with the UK will remain invariant. So it won't change. That, I think, is good assurance for us. It will be in place for 2 years, and then during which they hope they'll negotiate trade agreements with all the countries, and they'll eventually negotiate with us, you know, eventually. So we are at the bottom. But while this is going on, we will have the same trade regime. So in that sense, we have been given that sort of assurance, and that shouldn't be a problem. The issues for me will be the standard ones. You know, in terms of our people going to the UK, it's true the UK is not in Schengen or whatever the Schengen visa sort of country. But I think there are other things there. And I think the other thing which is also important is FDI. That is actually the most important, because we do get a lot of FDI from the UK and the US. And so we hope that Brexit will be quick and it will settle quickly and not destabilize our investors, because we do hope you can see and they can see good opportunities in Kenya. There was a question about NPLs, but I thought I talked about the NPLs, so I don't think I want to get into it. I think that's it, Wallace.